Hello everybody, to this video about how do contact tracing apps work. So in the last weeks there has been a lot of noise around contact tracing apps, what they are, how they work, different approaches, and I want to start breaking down these things a little bit from this perspective of APIs, of how information is exchanged, between which parties it is exchanged, when it is exchanged, because I think in the end that is what really matters. So let's dive right in. So what is contact tracing? Contact or proximity tracing is this idea that by using an app on your smartphone, you are able to track where you've been, maybe who you've been in touch with, so that in terms of containing the virus, if somebody tests positive, it's easier for you or for society at large basically to manage these outbreaks because you can find out who was in contact with an infected individual. So in the end, to me, contact tracing is the attempt to make it easier for people to start with their lives again so that they can go out and be in touch, but to still make sure that there are measures in place that if a virus is detected, we have a better way of tracing it and isolating the people and doing all these important things. So in order to make this happen, what you need is an app on your phone and different parts in this puzzle of what the app does and who reports what to whom. And in order to make all of this work, what's really important is APIs. APIs are application programming interfaces. These are, very roughly speaking, just the way how two systems communicate to each other. So it can be your phone to another person's phone. It can be your phone to a server that collects data about the contacts you've had, or it may be your phone alerting a server that you've been tested positive, and now you want to make sure that everybody who's been in contact with you can do the appropriate thing and quarantine themselves and so forth. So let's look at the scenario. So when you look at the general scenario, here's what we have. We have on the left-hand side our location or proximity testing. We have an app, we have a server, and we have some more stuff to the right we'll get to in a minute. Let's dissect that a little bit. So when we start on the very left, so the two concepts that people have been talking about is that you can either trace location or you can trace proximity. When you trace location, what you do is you basically trace location in the world. So by GPS or by using cell phone towers or by using Wi-Fi hotspots. So you can find out where people are. And then when you know where everybody has been, you can match that up and maybe find that people who have been infected have been in the same place as other people and you can alert those people. That's kind of nice, but more recently, what has become the more favored approach is to do proximity testing, meaning that you use proximity technologies such as Bluetooth to figure out where somebody has been and who else has been in that area. And you do that by these devices getting in contact directly. In order for that to work, what you need is, and I'll go through these step by step to explain which information is exchanged. In order for this to work, what we need is our first API. So the API basically between your environment and you. So when you walk around with your phone, you have an app on your phone, and that app then sends the environment. It may send the GPS location through receiving GPS signals, or it may send other Bluetooth devices nearby. That's something we will look in more detail we will look at that in more detail in follow-up videos. But generally speaking, what you need is this first API that sends the environment so that it can collect information about where you've been. So that later on you can have risk assessments and maybe tell you should quarantine yourself because you may have been infected, or you should go and test yourself. Now this is the first API. The second API, and that one was really in the media a lot in the last 2 weeks. And if you want to know more about that one, let me know in the comments and I'll be happy to dissect that a little bit for you. The second API that we need is an API on the device. So what you see here is your typical setup on a phone nowadays, where the phone has an operating system, the OS, which in many cases is either Apple's iOS or Google's Android. And that is the stuff that operates the phone. So this is the technology that really collects the data from, for example, the Bluetooth receiver. Now the question is, if you have an app installed on your device, what information can that app actually get access to? And that's a very interesting question, because in the case, for example, of this new proposal by Apple and Google, the app doesn't really have full access to all the data that the phone collects. And that is nice, because now some of the data, which is very sensitive because it's data about people who have been around you, so it's a lot of tracking data, some of that data maybe should never leave your device. And by even not making it available to the app, it's easier to guarantee that it will not leave the device, because the app doesn't even get access to that data. Right? So that's the first really important API in that picture, where we see that already, depending on how you design those communications, and there are different models how to do that, you already have a pretty good way of protecting the privacy of people who have been around you, where you don't need to expose their identities if nothing bad happens. You just keep that data for, let's say, 2 weeks, and then you discard it, and it never leaves the phone's operating system. Now, if something happens, let's say you have been tested as positive. Now, what also needs to exist is another API, and that API is the third one, and that is where the app on your phone is exchanging data with the server. So that server, for example, I live in Switzerland, so that server would be a server operated in Switzerland. There very likely would be some rules around who gets to trigger that notification. So who can say that I was infected? Maybe I can say that, or maybe it's a doctor who has to authenticate first, so that only licensed professional can make this statement. But regardless of these details, right, there's another communication channel that exists in this case between the app and the server. Now, in many models, what happens in this case then is to say, if I've been infected, also my trace data will be sent to the server. Because now that I've been infected, it's important that other people know where I've been, so that they can figure out whether they have been in contact with me, have been in proximity with me. So in that case, this API is a communication channel where if somebody was infected, all the data will be sent to the server. In other approaches, like the European one that was favored before the current one, this data was actually sent to the server all the time, which had a lot of privacy implications that a lot of people were unhappy with. We'll get into that in more detail in later videos, but for now, let's just make sure we understand all the different bits and pieces that are in that overall puzzle. The last one is also important, even though people don't talk about it this much, but I think it's really important, in particular in Europe, because Europe is full of small countries and people travel a lot. So the last one is a federation API. That sounds maybe a little complicated, but it just means that if I live in Switzerland and all my data goes to a Swiss server, and now I say I've been infected, how can somebody, for example, who visited from Germany learn that I've been infected? Right? So ideally, there would be a way of how different servers, the Swiss server, the German server, other European countries, maybe globally connected, how they exchange information, so that if more travel is allowed and people start traveling, you can still make sure that proximity testing and proximity monitoring works for people across nationalities, so that somebody who travels in a different country and gets exposed still gets the notification that they've been exposed. So this is fairly critical, in particular in places where you have, like in Europe, many different countries. And if all you do is set up your national system, it works as long as the borders are closed. But as soon as you open up the borders, suddenly you have a lot of traffic with no tracing. So that would be bad. So In order to engineer around this fourth API is also really important, this federation API, which allows all these different servers to then interconnect and make sure that information can be shared across borders. So in summary, when we look at this picture, what you see is this not very complicated, but also not trivial picture of 4 different steps of how information is exchanged. It's information that is exchanged between the environment and my phone. Then it's information that is exchanged between my phone and the app that is installed on my phone. Then it's information that's exchanged between the app on my phone and the server in the country where I live. And then it's also information that is exchanged across servers in different countries. And we will not go into any details now how these different information exchanges work in terms of when they are used, what kind of information is being exchanged and so forth. But this is where it's really important to understand and dissect the different approaches. And what we have now is a contract tracing landscape that sometimes may be a little bit hard to follow. So one of the things you may have heard is this PEPP-PT initiative, which was the first EU initiative around contact or proximity tracing, but it has become a little bit problematic now because they had a heavily centralized approach, which a lot of countries now don't want to take anymore. Then there is this other initiative, which actually has a very large footprint here in Switzerland, where I live. It was started from EPFL, the Swiss Federal University in Lausanne. It's called DP3T, and it's a decentralized alternative to the European initiative. And that's one that has become more and more popular. Switzerland is following it. Germany just last week switched to that approach as well. So we'll see how that goes. And then there's also complementary things, such as the Apple and Google initiative, which is different from the other one because it really is only about the API on the device. But it's something that also is essential because, for example, Bluetooth right now has some properties that make it hard to use in a good way. So we will need updates on the devices so that the devices actually become effective for being helpful in these contact tracing scenarios. So all of these things are different parts of the landscape that's currently evolving. All I wanted to do in this video was give you a little overview of the general landscape, and I showed you all the bits and pieces in place. And if you're interested in more information, definitely make sure to comment on this video so that I know what people are interested in. I want to continue producing this information. I'm currently reading through the Apple and Google documentation. I'm also reading through the DP3T specs, and I think it really is important that we all better understand how this works, because in the end, and that really is my main motivation for this video, in the end, we need to understand how it works so that we can trust it. And if people trust it, they will install the apps. And that is really what we have to make sure happens. People need to install the apps because we need to have good coverage with the apps. If people don't trust the apps, if people think something nefarious might happen, they will not install the apps, and we will lose a lot of possible effectiveness of the apps if we only have 20 or 30% of the people using the apps. So let's try to make sure we explain this as good as possible so that people understand what they're doing, and then I think they will be more likely to really install the apps and help us to better manage the coronavirus outbreak. So please become part of the discussion and comment on this video, and I'll try to contribute as much as I can in the next couple of weeks, I guess. Thank you very much, and see you soon on the channel. Bye.